my prediction is that this time, 2 weeks from now, that those tariffs won't be in place. There'll be something different.
Donald Trump has declared Russia an extraordinary threat to the United States as he rolled out his first sanctions over Vladimir Putin's refusal to stop the war in Ukraine. Trump has given Putin until Friday to agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine, threatening to place enormous tariffs on Russia's main trading partners. Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, has just issued a statement. He confirmed that he'd had a telephone conversation with the US president, and Times Radio understands that Keir Starmer, alongside other European leaders, also joined the call. Let's work this through then. Sir Bill Browder is CEO of Hermitage Capital. He's a high-profile Kremlin critic and author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's Number One Enemy. Bill Browder, a warm welcome to the show. Good to speak to you again. This signifies, I wonder if you'll agree, a significant gear change from Donald Trump and the US administration.
Well, I mean, I think it does for sure. There's one very real thing, which is secondary sanctions or tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. That's a real thing. And I think what we have to do, and we have to be very careful about this, is to separate words from actions. Words about extraordinary threats, all this kind of stuff, that's empty. Real tariffs, real sanctions, that's something serious. What they decided to do to India today could potentially be very much helpful towards ending this war, because over the last 3.5 years since the war started, India's bought about $350 billion worth of oil from Russia. That's $350 billion that India has basically supplied to the Russian war machine. However, the one thing I should caution everyone about is that there are a number of other countries that buy oil from Russia, namely China, Turkey, and others. Will Trump follow through on secondary sanctions against them tomorrow or Friday? That's a very important question. And then the second question is, will he maintain these sanctions against India? And I can easily imagine that shifting. We've seen other tariffs and other things moving around from one place to another from day to day. And then thirdly, there's all this weird talk about how well this meeting went between his special envoy Witkoff and Putin. What does he want to do about that? How does that factor into the whole equation?
Yeah, look, lots of questions that you've asked there. What is your gut on whether he will follow through with trade tariff sanctions against some of those other major economies that trade with Russia, China particularly? And I'll add on to that, Bill, actually, the question of whether other European countries, the UK included, would follow suit, whether they would, punish those major economies who do significant trade with Russia. If Russia, has dramatically less money coming in from those nations buying from it, of course, that will put something of a halt to their war machine, to the huge amounts of military hardware and equipment which is being pushed out of the country at the moment to fund the war in Ukraine.
Well, it's all very complicated. First of all, on the China question, it's not just about China buying Russian oil. It's also from buying Russian oil. China does, there's a whole big tariff and trade negotiation going on. Does Trump want to scupper that over this? I don't know. In terms of will other countries follow suit and join the United States in secondary sanctions or tariffs, I think that the United States imposing tariffs on all Indian goods in response to this is probably a very blunt instrument. I think it would only be necessary for the United States to sanction the businesses that are buying the Russian oil. And I think that if the rest of the world were to join the United States, that would effectively put those companies out of business if they were to do that. And then therefore they would stop buying Russian oil. To completely change your whole trade posture with a country over the specific buyers of Russian oil, I think is a very blunt way of doing it. But having said that, it's taking 3 steps back. If all these countries stopped buying Russian oil, the war would end, plain and simple.
Yeah. I mean, a blunt instrument, yes, but potentially a very effective one. Okay, all right. Look, where do you see this going now? We've got this Friday deadline. Donald Trump has, reacted to that meeting between his envoy Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin. We didn't know that we were going to get Putin in person, but we did. I wonder whether we hear from Russia, whether we hear from other countries about sanctions on Russia, whether people, buddy up with the United States and try and get this thing done once and for all. Where is your gut on this, Bill? I'm intrigued.
My gut is very simple, that Vladimir Putin has absolutely no interest in ending this war whatsoever. He needs this war in order to stay in power. He needs a war against a foreign enemy so that the Russian people are angry with a foreign enemy, not angry with him. And therefore, he's not going to stop the war. Now, what do, we, the collective West, when he doesn't stop the war? The answer is we supply more weapons to Ukraine, and we sanction Russia or sanction people who are buying oil from Russia. And depending on how many weapons we provide and how strong and complete those sanctions are will determine when Putin has to then negotiate. But right now, he feels like he's winning. He feels like the rest of the world is tiring of this war. He feels like the Ukrainians are tiring of this war. The Americans have stopped supplying military aid to Ukraine. He feels like he's in a strong position, and he's never, for 1 minute, dialed down his ambitions for a total victory in Ukraine.
Yeah, look, one of our listeners raises a good point, and this is why we love you getting in touch. Nigel says, given the recent trade deal with India, doesn't that preclude us from applying secondary sanctions as the US has just done? You're right about the trade deal that we've just broken with India, and whether that would affect things. I mean, it is a significant move by Donald Trump, this, because he, within the last month, called India a friend. I mean, they were close to agreeing a trade deal. I know that they were at 25%, now at 50%. But it just goes to show how the situation can twist and turn. Look, I mean, I'll go back to this point again, and obviously there are intricacies, the UK's relationship with India, etc. But why wouldn't other nations follow what you describe as a blunt instrument and really penalise Russia by starting to apply trade tariffs on any country that does significant business with it? China, is it because it's too much of a blunt instrument, Bill, for your liking?
It's way too blunt an instrument. We're not in the business of beautiful tariffs as Trump is, but we are in the business, and very specifically in the business of targeted sanctions. And if we were to go to the oil refineries that are buying the oil and say to them, if you buy Russian oil, then you can't do business with us at all, they'll stop buying Russian oil, plain and simple. We don't have to pair up all of our trade negotiations with India. We can just say that those businesses that are doing business with Russia will be subject to secondary sanctions, and that would be the end of it. We don't have to follow suit and do this enormously blunt instrument, which, by the way, I would suspect, my prediction is that this time, 2 weeks from now, that those tariffs won't be in place. There'll be something different. But if we were just go after the refineries, that would end the whole purchase of Russian oil. End of story.
Yeah, look, thank you for being with us. Go after the refineries is your message. Thank you for being with us. Bill Browder, Sir Bill Browder, CEO of Hermitage Capital, high-profile Kremlin critic and author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy. Good to speak to you. Thank you.